Hey everybody, can anybody hear me? Can I just get like a thumbs up in the comments just to make sure my audio is all good? For those just joining, we'll start in just a couple minutes, but just let me know if you guys can hear me. Just give me a thumbs up in the comments. Maybe what we'll do is we'll start at, I'll give it 2 more minutes, just see if anyone else joins, and then we'll get started. And the good thing is, because it's a live stream, people who can attend or are coming later can then watch it afterwards on Facebook. So, all good. All right, why don't we start getting started? And what I'll do is I'll introduce myself briefly. And the way that this will work, just like any of the other AMAs, is I've got a few questions that, like pre-arranged questions that I can help answer. A little bit about me, some tips I've learned through university, and also in terms of like job hunting. And then from there, if you guys have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. That makes my job a lot easier because this really is an opportunity to interact, and I'm really looking forward to it because I've watched a couple of the AMAs now, and I've found for me they've been really helpful, and I hope for Schulich Network I can deliver something that's just as helpful as well. So to introduce myself, my name is Danny McInnis, and I'm a fourth-year student, or I finished fourth year, I just graduated recently from the University of Toronto, and I was studying mechanical engineering, and throughout my degree, my interest changed a little bit. I went from being interested on the material side of mechanical, and then slowly veered over to product design, particularly consumer products. And that was one thing I really, really liked about mechanical was it gave me that breadth where I was able to move around. So really enjoyed that. Got involved with a few student clubs, including a club called McEngage, where we ran professional development workshops for what started as mechanical students on campus, but then became we grew it to the greater community, so not just engineering, but even arts and science students were taking our workshops too. So that was really cool. And got involved with Hyperloop as well. And that was a fast growing team on campus and something that I learned a lot from and also really enjoyed. And for those joining now, just as a recap, what I initially started with was, if you've got any questions throughout the event, just feel free to drop questions below. But if not, I've got some prearranged questions that I can go through. And I want to take the opportunity just to thank David and Kinga for putting this together, because AMAs for me have been a really cool opportunity to learn more about the Schulich leaders. There's some that I know really well, some that I don't know as well. And to get an hour of being able to ask them questions and learn from them, I think is a really cool opportunity. So I'm excited to be a part of this. And I guess back to my intro, I talked a little bit about mechanical engineering, recently graduating, and I'll be starting work at Logitech in a couple months at the beginning of September. So I'm really excited for that, because for me, my interests are more on the consumer product side. So being able to create products that people use every day. I'm a big Logitech fan. I've been using their products for a while. So to be able to see it from the other side is something that's really, really exciting to me. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And I'm ready for the new adventure for sure. And why don't I start with a couple of the generic questions? I don't see, actually I see a question from Ellie already. So what was your favorite engineering project in undergrad and why? Coursework, an extracurricular, or internship? That's a really good question. In mechanical, it's pretty hands-on, so we get to build a lot of things, and I think that's definitely where my interest lies, because I'm someone who I really like math and science, but not from the point of view that we normally see it in high school, where math and science is very like abstract and numbers on the board and all that. For me, I appreciate math and science when it's something that I can see in front of me, when it relates to like a physical product or a mechanism or something like that, and that's why I really enjoyed mechanical. So I think in terms of a coursework project, my favorite would probably be probably capstone, and I think that's probably similar for a lot of engineering students as they get to fourth year. Capstone is basically a project that you work on either for 1 semester or 2 semesters. At U of T it was 2 semesters, and you work in a group of 4, and basically you have a client and you're building something to fit the need of that client. So the client that I was working for is called Global Medic, and Global Medic is a disaster relief charity that wanted to get into flood response, and basically they wanted a new way to fill sandbags more efficiently. So my team created a device that converts like a traditional snowblower, which is pretty common in Canada, into a sandbagging machine. So this tube that attaches to the snowblower, and then you can actually run it through a pile of sand with some modifications and fill up sandbags automatically. So we were able to improve the efficiency of sandbagging by about a factor of 4. So you're filling them much faster and a lot less labor as well, because now you're not lifting that sand with a shovel. So really cool project and really enjoyed it. I don't see any other questions, so I'll jump into a couple of the generic ones. So when did you know you wanted to pursue a career in your current discipline? And I kind of touched on it earlier, but definitely didn't start university knowing that I wanted to go into product design. I kind of went into mechanical with an open mind. I knew it was really broad and there was a lot to learn. So I don't think I had like a particular direction in mind when I started. And then probably I think it was first year is when I really grabbed onto materials, which is like a segment of mechanical. And the reason why was I had a really good professor that was great at doing physical demos in class that really show you like why we're learning the material that we're learning. And he would do that once or twice in a week. So that was really cool. And it was different from a lot of my classes where it was more theoretical. So to see that practical side, I grabbed onto it. Whenever you've got a professor that is really, really passionate about a topic, it makes a huge difference. And I think that goes for any program. So I really got into materials. I liked the idea of being able to use materials to influence your designs within mechanical. So part of that comes from selecting the appropriate material. You've got tens of thousands of options, and to pick the proper one for a design is critical to making sure that it performs the way you want it to perform. But then on the materials engineering side, you can actually create new materials. So when you find there's a gap and there's no material that actually does what you want it to do, that's when materials engineers can get together and create materials like carbon fiber. Like that was something that didn't exist previously, and now it fits a big need. And yeah, I think that part was really cool. And then I took a couple internships, one at a smaller company where I was doing robotics and one at a bigger company where I was doing aerospace. And I really liked that kind of stuff, but I found the the time from when you start, you got an idea, and then you bring it to market is really slow, especially in an industry like aerospace where safety regulations and the complexity of the stuff you're working on is pretty intense. So don't get me wrong, I love the technical work. I love the teams that I worked on there, but I wanted to do something a little bit faster paced. And for my last internship, I worked at a product development firm in Toronto called Inertia. And basically, it's a small company that works with anywhere between like small startups all the way up to big enterprises that need support on the design and manufacturing side. So they come in with an idea, they want us to help them design it, build it, test it. And I really like that because you got your hands dirty, you got to work with a lot of different projects and see a product through to from conception all the way to market ready stage, and then pursuing it afterwards. So thought that was really cool. And then the only thing that I wanted different was I wanted to be in an environment where the company that I was working at was developing their own products versus developing it for other people. So I applied to a bunch of different companies and eventually landed the Logitech job, which I'm really excited for, but I haven't started yet. I'll be starting it in September. And I think there's another question that came in from Zach. So, hi, I'm starting my undergrad in the fall. Is there anything you wish you knew when you're in my position? That is a good question. I think it definitely depends on the program you're going into, but a couple tips that I got early on that really helped me out was get involved. And most people tell you get involved because it's a way to take your mind off school and de-stress, which is absolutely true. And it's great to get involved in other ways than just like pure academics. But I think getting involved can actually help your academics too. Like for me, when I got involved in clubs in first year, I met some really good friends. There's some people that are really good friends to me now that were upper year students. So people that were like second year, third year, fourth year when I was in first year. And those people can serve to be really good mentors for you. So to have an upper year student in your program that has been in those classes before and they can tell you what to watch out for, if there's a prof that's tougher than another prof or a prof that's more passionate than another one, profs make a big difference. And to have a prof that's passionate about teaching and likes seeing their students learning and everything can really make the difference for you. So I'd say definitely get involved, try to meet some upper year students that can give you some tips. And then another tip would be to do temperature checks. I'll talk a little bit about this afterwards, but I had a class in fourth year called Engineering Leadership, and we talked a lot about temperature checks and doing we would plot it out. It was like a time energy graph for the week, and basically the idea was you look at every single thing you do in the day, whether it comes to how you're studying, when you go out with friends, jobs, job applications, all the stuff that you do from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep, and look at, does it give you energy or does it take away energy? And then also how much time does it take up? And that's something I never thought about before. I always looked at all these responsibilities that I had and that I had to meet them, and that can get really stressful. But when you really dissect your day and look at, okay, if I spend 2 hours studying, how do I feel afterwards? And you either, it gives you energy or it takes away energy. So I know for me, if I was to use an example, it'd be like, if I went and hung out with friends for an hour, I'm going to get a lot more energy. And if I went back to studying after, then I can study a lot longer. Whereas if one subject I didn't like in first year is linear algebra. So if I spent 3 hours doing linear algebra and then I knew I had to do something that was very energy intensive afterwards, it would be a better idea to position my day so that I do things that give me energy, and then I'm also doing things that take it away when necessary. So trying to find that balance and really making sure that you're not burning out is definitely a really good tactic. Because high school is pretty different from university, but the nice thing is everybody in first year is kind of going through the same thing at once, and you'll have a lot of support in that. And the university is really, really good at trying to find ways to support you, but you do got to look for those. So hopefully that helps answer your question. Austin's got a question. For the leaders who are interested in product design, what would you say are the pros and cons between large corporations, consulting firms, and startups? Okay, really good question. So having a little bit of experience at small companies as well as big companies from internships, I'd say it's tough to generalize because every company is going to act differently. But I think, at least in my experience, what I saw was when I was at a smaller company, because there's less people there, you get more breadth. You're going to be doing a lot more, a lot of different tasks because there's not enough people to go around and there's a lot happening. So startups, small companies can be great for trying to learn a lot at once. But that's not to say that you're not going to learn things at a big company. I worked at a big company for my year-long co-op, and that was a company called Safran, and they make aerospace components for, I was working on Boeing 787 planes, but they do anything from Airbus, Embraer, Boeing, Bombardier, pretty much all the brands. They build a bunch of parts for them. So large company, and there I learned a lot, but very narrow in what I learned. So I had a very specific role because there's a ton of employees. They can put you on really specific projects, but then you go into much more depth than you would if you had a role that was a lot more breadth. And I think it also depends on the industry, but the pace of how things are done will definitely be different. And you hear that usually smaller companies move faster. Not always the case, because you can have a big company that has a lot of resources and are really efficient with those resources, so you can get some speed from that. But I would say for the most part, small companies do move faster because they don't have the levels of bureaucracy and those things that really slow things down. So I wouldn't say that I would lean towards one or the other, at least my personal preference, but I do think trying to find an environment that really suits well to you is really important. And actually, to add to that, one thing I didn't know when I started university was I was really interested in entrepreneurship, and I still am. But one term I wasn't aware of was intrapreneurship. And there's a lot of big companies that are focusing on intrapreneurship, which is basically, so for those who don't know, entrepreneurship is when you're starting your own business. But intrapreneurship is when you're using a lot of those skills in terms of like managing resources and working with teams and trying to scale up new ideas, but you're doing it within an existing corporation. So big companies like Google, for instance, have a culture of intrapreneurship where if you've ever heard of the 20% rule at Google, where 20% of your time can be spent working on anything that interests you, and that's how they've created products like Gmail is one of the examples of an employee or a group of employees that spent a little bit of their free time working on something that they wanted to build, and it turned into a product. So some companies are giving employees the liberty to kind of pursue entrepreneurship in a way within the company. And I think that's really exciting. And that's where a big company can come in handy because they've got the resources and the money to fund those ideas as long as they are building up that kind of culture in the company. So I think that's really exciting. That's something I'm seeing kind of in Logitech, and that's one reason why I'm super excited to start there. So hopefully that helps answer your question. Julia, and if anyone's got a follow-up question or I didn't answer it properly, hit me up in the comments and I'll try to address it better. So Julia is asking were there any undergraduate electives outside of engineering that complemented what you learned in your program? Good question. So in engineering, at least for me, I didn't have too many opportunities to take electives outside of engineering. It was a pretty, our schedules were pretty decided for us already. But I would say I took a couple electives in second year. I was in a geography course, English course. Not a huge fan of English, to be honest with you. I learned that knowing how to write essays in high school, very different from knowing how to write essays in an English class in university. So learned that the hard way. Geography was pretty cool, but I would say that my favorite elective outside of engineering was in fourth year, where I took an entrepreneurship course. And it was a really small class. We were probably only, I think we were probably 9 students, whereas most classes for U of T engineering were anywhere between 100 and 250. And first year we had a class that was about 1,000 people. So to be able to jump down to 9 people and have that more FaceTime with the prof and really getting our hands dirty on a project for the whole semester was really cool. And I really, really enjoyed it. And I think entrepreneurship has a big role in engineering, especially if you're at a company where there's that whole entrepreneurship side. You don't necessarily need to be building your own business, but you can be within a company and benefiting from the things you learn in an entrepreneurship class. So I thought that was very cool and highly recommend it to anyone interested in that kind of stuff. Ellie's got a question. What are some of the most valuable skills or lessons you learned through experiences outside of your immediate coursework? Outside of your immediate coursework. Okay, that's a good question. I would say learning how to, how do I word this? Learning how to, okay, so my first answer to that question would be learning how to work with others. And if you're in a leadership role, learning how to lead properly, because everyone's got different leadership styles. And I kind of worked on this, still working on it, but I kind of worked on it in two facets. So in one way, I was a university residence don or residence assistant, depends what university you're at, they call it different things. But basically what you're doing is you're like an upper year student that's living on the floor, and you're there to serve as a mentor for the 40 students that live on your floor. So that was a really cool experience. Got to learn a lot about different people from many different backgrounds. And for me, that was really a position that kind of put me out of my comfort zone, and I really enjoyed it. So I would say learning how to interact with a big group of people and how to work with them and how to get to like a common goal is a really useful skill. And I guess the flip side to that too, a little bit more practical, would be I joined University of Toronto Hyperloop team in the beginning of fourth year. And that was a really fast growing team where we grew from, I think when I joined, we were at 20 members and now we're over 200. So that growth is great, but it also comes with growing pains, because once you hit 100, 150, 200 members, the way you need to manage the team is quite different. And I got put up into a more of like a management position for the team, and learning how to interact with big groups of people, but also being a support to people one-on-one when they need it is tougher than it sounds. And it's something that I'm still working on, but I've definitely gotten better at. And that only comes with practice, because I think as much as I mentioned that I was in like an engineering leadership class, and there are some aspects of that you can teach, I think a lot of it comes by practice and trial and error and learning what works for you, because the way that I lead is going to be different from how you lead or anybody else leads. And I think a lot of you probably have experience with that already, being in the Schulich network, just because we come from that kind of leadership background. So yeah, I think that's pretty relevant, and it goes for any program. It doesn't have to be engineering, doesn't have to be related to my interests by any means. Did your program have online courses? If so, do you have any advice for incoming engineering students on how to complete online learning? So not really. I had one class in fourth year that was partly online. We still had tutorials in person, but I know with COVID now, online classes are more of a reality for more people. So I would say, I think one downside to online is it's harder to have that FaceTime with the prof and meet people in the class and all that. And those are things that can really help when you're struggling with certain concepts. So I'd say, really take advantage of office hours. I'm sure profs are going to have like online office hours where you can ask them questions and go to them for support and stuff like that. And I think that is really important. To be fair, I think my last 3 weeks in university was online. So I did have a little bit of experience with everything going online. And as much as it was an adjustment for the profs and for the students, I would say that as long as you're able to consume the material in that way, like everybody learns differently. And I know for me, I'm very visual and I like videos. So to have an online lecture and a video and have access to the internet where I can then look up questions if I'm confused about stuff, that works well for me, but it doesn't necessarily work well for others. Like some people want to be able to ask questions immediately, and that's easy to do in class, or easier, but a lot tougher online when it's a live stream and it's tough to like interrupt the class. So I would say just trying to figure out how you learn and then trying to adapt. So if you're somebody that needs to ask those questions, it might be a good idea to see if there's another way to reach out to the prof. If you can't do it in the lectures online, if it's a big class, then maybe see if you can go to office hours or maybe through email. Just reach out to your professor. Teaching assistants also are a really underrated resource. I didn't use them enough in first year, and I really benefited from them moving forwards afterwards. And it's not even just academic stuff. You'll find you've got similar interests to them, and they can even help introduce you to companies or opportunities on campus. And I think being able to interact with them is a really good opportunity. So yeah, I don't see any new questions, so I'll jump to another one, another generic one. So what do you find most interesting or exciting about your field of study? So I think for me, what I find most exciting is how much the field is changing and how there's new things being created almost every day. So I mean, when I started university, there was a lot of hype around 3D printing. There still is, not as much as before, but that's one example that a lot of people are aware of that has a big impact on mechanical, because it took what, although 3D printing's been around for a while, it only became mainstream recently. And the benefit of 3D printing is that you don't really have to waste any material. So in normal manufacturing methods, like when you're machining something, you take a big block of metal or plastic or whatever, and then you machine away what you don't need. So there's all that waste. It's pretty costly. It takes a lot of time. But then with additive manufacturing, you're only adding the material that you need to use. So it creates new opportunities to create geometries we couldn't create before. And that can solve problems that weren't solvable before. So I think that part is really cool and mechanical. But I also do like the fact that there's breadth and there's and it's like a pretty established field, because although there are new things happening in it, there's also some fundamentals that go way back, like more than 100 years. And I think it's good to have that mix and learn about both sides of it. So that really excites me. I think, did we get a new question? I'm just going to refresh here. I've got it on my computer. In the meantime, one thing I wanted to talk about was job application tips, because I know a lot of you will be applying to internships or full-time jobs, and having done having done 4 internships now, I've got a little bit of experience with job applications. So one thing that I've learned throughout the experience is that volume, in terms of the volume of applications that companies get, is a lot greater than I thought. And that partly due to the internet and how accessible it is. So when you see a posting go online, there's probably hundreds, if not thousands, of people that are applying to those positions. So volume is important. Like, it's important to apply to a lot of jobs and really put yourself out there and try new things. But that, because there's volume, there's a lot of consistency in what people do. Cover letters may look similar. A lot of people don't put enough effort into cover letters. They focus more on the resume. And I think cover letters are a really good opportunity to stand out, because most people don't want to spend the time to write a like a creative cover letter that really fits that job, especially when you're applying to 25, 50, even 100 job applications. Being able to write a cover letter for each is really tiring. So that is a really good opportunity to stand out if you can spend the time to write those cover letters well. But a couple other techniques that I've used, especially in years 3 and 4 for me, that I found really helpful is, one is DMing people in your field. And what I mean by that is, if you're on LinkedIn, you'll see there's a lot of recruiters that post that they're hiring, and that's the perfect opportunity to hit them up and say, hey, I'm looking for a job. But the only problem with that is there's thousands of people seeing that, and recruiters' jobs are to interact with those people. So I mean, the volume that they're getting is huge, and it's kind of hard to break through that noise and to be different, especially with LinkedIn, where you can only send a really short message before you're connected with someone. It can be really, really hard to differentiate yourself. So in first and second year, when I was trying to get like research opportunities or internships, I was applying and messaging recruiters particularly. But then when it comes to third and fourth year, what I started doing different was messaging people that are in the field that I want to work in. And what I mean by that is, let's say I want to work in Logitech and I want to be designing their gaming mice. What I would do is, instead of just applying to recruiters, I still would send a message to a recruiter just to cover that ground, but I would then start searching on LinkedIn for engineers that work on the gaming mice at Logitech, and then try messaging them and say, hey, I'm a student interested in seeing if there's like an internship opportunity or whatever. You can, and it's actually better not to start with, hey, I'm looking for a job, but to start with, see if you can find some common interest with them. Maybe they're an alumni at your school. Maybe they post articles about something that you're interested in, and you can start with that. But reaching out to people that are actually in the departments you'd be working in if you got the job is a much better strategy, in my opinion, because one, they're going to be the technical people that understand what's on your resume and what's in your application better than HR would. And they get a lot less volume coming their way. So if they connect with you, whether it's based on common interests or based on the merits of your application, I think the odds of getting through that noise and through that barrier is better, because once they're interested, they can pass it off to HR and say, hey, just got this cool application, take a look at it. And it's a lot more powerful if that, hey, take a look at it, is coming from someone within the company versus just a student applying. So I found that really helped me for my last internship, as well as getting my full-time job. And then the second tip would be, this is more for full-time employees, because with internships, I find sometimes in applications they'll dump a whole list of skills that you need, and you don't necessarily need all of them. It's mostly suggested, and the more you have, the better. But for some of the full-time jobs that I was applying to, it really seemed like you needed all the skills. And I was applying to some where I had most of them, or I had something similar. Like I was really good with one design software, but I didn't have experience with this other design software that they use. So when I was getting the interviews, one thing I was trying was, by the time I had my first technical interview, if I knew there was a big skill that I was not missing on, but I didn't really have the exact one, like I knew that one software, but not the other, I kind of created a plan for myself in terms of like how I would learn that skill. Obviously, you're not going to go and stay up all night and learn it before the interview, but if you can come up with a quick plan as to, okay, I know this and I want to translate my knowledge in this to then learn this new software, this new programming language or whatever. Basically what I did was I told the technical interviewer that if I got the job and I had X amount of weeks before starting full time, this is what I do like week by week to convert what I learned from that one software I knew to the other one. And I think that really helped me stand out, because it showed that one, I was committed to learning those new skills and I was interested in the job. But two, it showed that I knew what I didn't know. Like I wasn't in denial that like I know everything or whatever. Like I know exactly what I don't know and what I do need for the job. And I think a lot of people try to dance around that, and they don't want to identify their weaknesses, or they don't want to identify what they may not know. But I think that can be really powerful if you do that, because it's not necessarily a bad thing. It shows you know what you're like, where you stand and also where you want to be. So those are my two tips for creative applications. Looks like a couple more questions came in. So what strategies or ways of thinking do you utilize when building new products that help people use every day? Quote from the brief for this: anticipated follow-up. What are you most excited to build in the future? Okay, two really good questions. So strategies or thinking products that people use every day. Okay, so for the first question, in terms of trying to come up with ways of thinking to build something that people will use every day, I think it's really, really important to understand who your customer is, or who, like, what is the need that you're filling. There's a lot of people that will go and try to build something and then try to find a solution for it. They'll build some sort of technology and then they'll try to find all the markets that it can apply in. But a much more efficient way of doing that is study your market first. Try to figure out what the need is, who your customer is, why they buy, how they buy, all that kind of stuff, and then see what the competition is, and then how can you improve upon that. And I think that's a better way, because you get to look at the whole picture, and then you got to identify what the gaps are, and then pursue that gap, because it's really important to be different, especially when now with the internet and with like scaling economies, it's really quick for a company to come up with a new idea. So there's new ideas coming up every day, and it's important to try to be different, because if you're jumping into an industry that is oversaturated and you don't have a differentiating factor, then it's really tough to compete with those companies. So I guess an example from an internship was when I was working at Inertia, one thing that we would do, and it was actually a lot of fun to do, was we would do user studies, where when we were trying to figure out how we wanted to design something or what we were trying to do, we would actually run through user studies where we would get people around the office or get users to perform a certain set of tasks, and we would study it, but we would also film it so we could watch it afterwards and see like how they interacted with the product, what they grabbed first, were they looking at the label, were they not looking at the label, and it was all these little minor things that were really tough to pick up on at first glance because there's so much going on. But when you watch it back over video and rewatch it, you start to pick up on little nuances as to how the user interacts with the product, and then that's when you can tweak it and refine it so that you're really making sure that it's intuitive to use and it's something that actually solves the problem efficiently, because it'd be a shame to solve one problem but then create another one because your device isn't easy to use or it doesn't really fit the need properly. So yeah, I would say identifying your use case and understanding your market is super important. And then second question is, what are you most excited to build in the future? For me, I'd say that's a tough question because I feel like my interests change quite a bit. I wouldn't say that I jump between like two different extremes a lot, but I would say that they change with time because I'm constantly learning. I'm someone that, even though I'm done university, at least for now, I'm trying to pick up new skills all the time. So I'm doing a couple online classes for fun, doing a lot of reading, and just trying to figure out kind of like where my interests lie. But for now, what I'm really interested in is building tech products that people use to create things every day. So that's why Logitech is really interesting to me. And I think the reason why that interests me more than some of the internships that I've worked on is because when you have that scale in terms of people using your products, you learn really quickly if your product works well or if it doesn't work well, or if it's a success in the market or if people don't buy it. And then you learn from that, so you're able to iterate pretty quickly. Whereas if you are in an industry where you're designing and testing and building something that takes like 10 years and then you release it, it's a lot tougher to adapt after that. You've spent 10 years and then you're going to find out what the market thinks of it. So I think especially in cases where you're building something longer term, it's really important to check in with those stakeholders partway through and see what the market need is, because it changes all the time. So you want to make sure that what you're building is not outdated by the time it actually gets out there. So hopefully that helps answer the question. And then Kinga asked, do you have any interview tips? Good question. I would say I talked a little bit about self-awareness before, like trying to figure out what you know, what you don't know. Also, when I talked about like the time energy graph thing, like learning about what gives you energy, what doesn't give you energy in the day. I think it's really important to understand what your interviewing style is. Like there's some people that are really good at like the casual banter. There's some people that are really good at technical interviews, some people that are great at all of it. And I think one thing that's important is understanding how you deal with certain situations. Like if you get put in, if you've got like a stressful question. I know I had one in one of my first co-op interviews where I got a really bad grade in first year, and that's totally normal to I think for me, I underestimated how difficult some of the classes would be in first year, and that's not to say that they're all difficult. I think I just put my time into other things, and then it get caught up on me. So definitely stay on top of your courses as much as you can. So I had a bad grade, and then I had a couple interviewers pick on it, and pretty harshly too. And knowing how to react to that is really important. So for me, I'd worked on a project for fun. I was like playing around with little Arduinos, and that interested me. I wanted to learn electronics and programming, but did terrible in this electronics class. So what I was able to say was, although I didn't do well in this class because I don't really learn well from like textbooks and chalkboards and stuff like that. I was able to show them pictures of this thing that I built instead that relates to the same concepts, and basically explain that I learn better by doing versus like textbooks, chalkboards, all that. So coming up with those answers and knowing how to answer to those weaknesses is really important. But I'd also say treat it like a conversation. Like, don't get too stressed out about it. They're there to learn about you. You're there to learn about them just as much. Come with questions. I know it can be intimidating to ask companies questions because they're there to interview you, but a really good candidate is somebody who is going to ask those questions because you want to make sure it's a good fit for you, and that's really important for the company, because if you don't end up liking the job, then you're not going to perform as well as somebody who does like the job. So for you to ask all those questions in the interview just shows that you're really trying to gauge what that job's going to be like and what that environment's going to be like. And I encourage you not to just ask questions about the job, but even dive into stuff like workplace culture and what their experience has been at the company and how they got involved in the company and all that, because you can learn a lot from that, and then you can make your decisions based on what you learned there. And a lot of that stuff are not things you're going to find online, so being able to get that face time with an interviewer is super helpful. So yeah, I'd say that's big. Sorry, my throat's been drying out. How do you put yourself in your customer's shoes for a product-focused role? How do you cater to the wide diversity of customers who may have different preferences than your own? Okay, good question. I think this really depends on the industry you're in. So when I was working at the product development firm, it was pretty varied. We would work on, for the most part, I was working on wheelchairs that help you get in and out of a bathtub if you can't get out of the wheelchair. But there were times where I was working on a video game console. I was working on a drink machine, like something comparable to SodaStream. So pretty diverse. And obviously, as you can imagine, the customers in that space are going to be pretty diverse as well. So I think, so how do you put yourself in your customer's shoes for a product-focused role? I would say the most important thing is if you can reach out to those customers and you can talk to them, try to find a way that you can ask them questions without being too intrusive or taking up too much time, because then you don't necessarily get the same quality of answers. So focus groups can be a really good way to learn. User studies can be a good way to learn. Job shadowing even can be great if you're developing a medical device and you can get FaceTime with let's say a surgeon that's going to be using the technology, to be able to be in the operating room and see what they're doing and are there ways you can improve it, is going to be super valuable. So I think the more that you can put yourself in like a real situation to see how they're using it in real life, that is going to help you understand your customer and what their point of view is. And how do you cater to the wide diversity of customers that may have different preferences than your own? I would say it's really important to work with a diverse team and also seek opinions from others. If you're just building something by yourself, which is totally okay, there's some startups that start up with just one person. I would say it's important to run what you're doing by potential customers or run it by people you know that can have a valuable input, because putting multiple heads together versus just one is going to be really important. And I think when you get more than one head together is when you're going to start to pick out the nuances, because if you're just one person building a product for 10,000 people, those 10,000 people are going to have very different opinions and you're only going to have one. So it's important to diversify those opinions early on so that you can try to cater to a greater segment of that market. So hopefully that helps answer the question. No new questions yet that I'm seeing, so why don't I jump to let's see here. What does your ideal career path look like? Okay, so that one is something that I've thought about for a while, especially as my interests changed throughout university. And I think for me, what I've learned is I want to be in a role where I can continue to learn, where it's okay to make those mistakes. I can figure things out on the go because I do learn by doing. And I think a lot of people are like that. But I also want to be in a role where I can double that learning with mentorship, because I find that most people think of mentorship as the mentee is learning from the mentor, but as somebody who's mentored a lot of people with like that residence dawn job where I was a mentor for 40 students each year on my floor, and in Hyperloop where I'm managing a team of maybe 60-ish people that are working on the pod that we're designing. What I've learned is I actually learn a lot from the mentees, and talking to people who are in mentorship roles. It's kind of like a give and take. Like you are helping them out, but also they are helping you out. You learn a lot from the people that you work with. So for me, I get a lot of energy from that kind of stuff, meaning I don't mind putting in the long hours when I'm in that kind of environment, because I find I get to help people, they get to help me, and I find that really motivating because I'm someone, like I said, who constantly likes to learn, and part of that learning comes through interacting with people. So definitely I want to be in a role where I can do that. Whether that means I'm working within a company or starting my own, I think that's something that I always want to have there as a trait for sure. So hopefully that makes sense. And yeah, if you guys have any questions, keep them coming. Maybe what we'll do is we'll wrap up in about 10 minutes or so. I'll see what the questions are like. And then if you have any questions afterwards, I'll put my contact info in the comments, so you can hit me up on Facebook, LinkedIn, or email. So it gives you a few options. Why don't I dive into, I talked about entrepreneurship versus intrapreneurship. I can give an example of where I saw entrepreneurship. So I gave that Google example. I've never worked at Google, so I don't know what that's actually like. But I worked at Safran for an internship, and that was the aerospace company that I worked at. And they had this innovation challenge, which is very intrapreneurial. So doing that entrepreneurship, but within a company. And basically the idea was, although we had pretty narrow roles and very, I guess defined is a better word, very defined roles versus narrow roles, they had this idea where they wanted to foster a better sense of like entrepreneurship and coming up with new ideas and not being afraid to like challenge the status quo within the company. So came up with this idea where basically any employee, doesn't matter what position you're in, technical, not technical, you can pair up with other employees and pitch an idea to the company. So for an aerospace company, typically it was like a better design for like a landing gear for a plane or anything like that. So really, really cool ideas were pitched. The company allowed people to spend a portion of their time working on that aside from their roles, like their respective roles. And really cool ideas came out of it, ideas that the company previously were not looking at all, had never thought of. So in terms of creativity, that was really cool. And then they turned it into a competition where they funneled, I think, 40 ideas down to 20, down to 10, down to 5, and eventually selected one. And if you were the winning selection, you and your team would be essentially promised a certain percent of your hours, let's say 50% of your hours now can be converted over to pursuing this new idea. They'd give you the budget to run with it, the support to actually test it, develop it, scale it up within the company, and hopefully it becomes a new product or a new opportunity for the company. And in terms of learning experience, that's huge because you go from kind of doing what you're told to actually driving where the company is going. And there were interns that were involved with that too, which is awesome. So basically you could be there for a year and come out with it, come out of the year experience saying, I learned a bunch about aerospace, but I also learned about how to take an idea, scale it up, and pitch it to a company. And that's super valuable no matter where you end up afterwards. And I think that kind of scales, or that leads nicely into my next point about internships is, although trying to find a company that fits for you is really important, I wouldn't stress out over it too much. I think sometimes, like especially if you're in a short internship, like a 4-month or a six month, they go by really, really quickly. And if you find it's something that you don't like, there's value in that, because learning that you don't like a certain industry or a certain field while you're super young and a student is much better than learning when you're 40 or 50. So I think, like for me, I loved Safran. I loved the team there. Really liked the work I was doing. I just didn't really like aerospace environment. It just wasn't for me. And there was no harm done. I learned a ton there, and I learned early that I don't really want to work in aerospace, at least not for now. And yeah, I think it's a pretty valuable lesson to learn. So often people think about lessons as like they've got like a positive spin to it, and I think there's a positive spin to learning that you don't like something, but sometimes people look at that as like more of a negative, and I quickly realized that it was a good thing for me. So I think being open-minded and willing to try new things is definitely a good skill to have for sure. I'm just gonna refresh here and see if we got any new questions. No, it looks like it's all good so far. So yeah, if anyone's got any questions in the next couple minutes, drop them in the comments. I'll answer one more of the generic ones, and then we'll wrap up, and I'll put my contact info in if I don't see any more questions come up. So one that I haven't answered yet. What kind of extracurricular activities are you involved in, and how do they help you as a student? So although I've already graduated as of a couple months ago, I'm still involved with a couple of my commitments from school, one of which being Hyperloop, and I know I talked a little bit about that before. And for me, the thing that I gain from it day to day is I love interacting with the team. We have a really cool team, very motivated, very committed to the same vision of like developing high-speed transportation, but I learn a ton from them. There's a lot of really smart people that are constantly willing to challenge status quo and like what the team's currently doing, and I think you learn a lot from that. So that's been really interesting for me, and it's given me like a technical project to work on while I've got some downtime, because after COVID hit and universities closed down, I moved back to Ottawa. So I grew up in Ottawa before and went to school in Toronto. So moved back to Ottawa in the end of March, and I've been here since. And basically my job starts in September. So now that school's done as of the end of April, it's given me a little bit of technical work to work on, but I've also been enjoying my summer, getting outside. I think that's super important with this whole lockdown thing that we were going through before. So I think finding ways to take breaks and enjoy the weather, see friends, see family has been awesome for me, and I'm sure many of you have been doing the same as well. So yeah, that's about it. I don't see any other questions, so what I'll do is I'll drop my contact info in the comments below. I want to thank you guys for taking time out of your day to listen to the AMA, to put awesome questions in the comments. That made my job super easy. I want to thank Kinga and David again for organizing this, because I think it's super helpful for the Schulich leaders, especially new ones that are coming into university and have a ton of questions. And don't be shy. Feel free to reach out to me, to anyone who's done the AMAs, or anyone really in the network. I've found I've learned a lot from people in the network, and most people are super helpful and willing to answer your questions. So yeah, don't be shy. Hit us up, and yeah, thank you for taking the time, and check out the comments if you want my contact info to ask me any questions. Anyways, take care everybody, and thanks again.